Hi, good morning, Neil Sean here in the very heart of London. As ever, lovely to see you today. Welcome one and all to what happened on this day. As I often say, I know I'm so glad you're enjoying this because I think you just find things out about your own history and what we take for granted now as pieces that, you think, oh yeah, and then when you realise how long things have been going, you kind of think, really? Was that truly the case? Now, if like me, when you were at school, computers were a bit of an anomaly, as they say, only the brainy people were allowed to use the computers. Do you remember? They had a computer room, and if you were considered intelligent, you were taken down there and allowed a few hours on there. Well, take your mind back to 1981, because that was the year on this day that the very first computer was launched, and this was kind of like a home computer. You could buy it for the very first time, install it into your home if you knew what to do, and then you were off. I think it must have been a little bit like the mobile phone though, don't you? Because if you think about it, if you didn't know anybody else with a computer, who could you send an email to? And it was, do you remember, with a mobile, you had a mobile, and you think, do I know anybody with a mobile phone? So on this day, if you were rich enough, because it was a lot more expensive then, IPC launched their very first computer. Oh yes. But as ever, what else happened on this day? Born on this day in 1860, the American markswoman Annie Oakley, who starred in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, where she was often called Little Sure Shot, was born. Now, of course, we know her more famously thanks to the 1953 movie starring the beautiful and very, very talented Doris Day. But again, if you think about it, in 1860, the fact that she was considered, as kind of an offbeat talent and appearing in a Wild West show proves once again that truly nothing is new. 1879, the actress Ethel Barrymore, who was considered the very first lady of American theatre, was born in the beautiful state of Philadelphia. And I still believe, I'm not quite sure, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's a theatre still named after her on Broadway. Of course, the Barrymores dynasty became, massive, didn't it? It's a bit like over here in England, the Richardsons, the Oliviers, that sort of stuff. That name became sort of synonymous with wonderful acting and, of course, top-notch performances. 1851, this American inventor actually changed the way of the world for ladies of that day. And let me explain, because again, I don't know if you were like this, but when you were at school, there were certain classes that boys could go to and girls could go to. And one of them was sewing classes. And I remember this distinctly because one of the classes was to learn how to work a Singer sewing machine. Do you remember that? Now, in 1851, the American inventor, Isaac Singer, patented the sewing machine. And when you think about it, what an idea, and more importantly, isn't it amazing that it's still going today? Apparently, if you wanted to buy one way back in 1851, oh yes, it would have cost you a kind of just under an equivalent to ours to possibly under $2, under £2. Quite pricey today, am I right, ladies? Now, way back in 1927, a movie which starred an actress who was kind of the biggest thing of her day, Clara Bow. She of the Cupid lips. She was kind of like, if you want to think about this, the Jennifer Lopez of a generation, All girls copied her style, her hair, her makeup, everything. Well, I didn't know this until researching this, but this is one of only 2 silent films, the other being The Artist way years later in 2011 to win an Oscar for Best Picture. Wings, which starred Clara and of course was an incredible performance when you think for a silent film, won Outstanding Picture way back in 1929. Now, one thing that none of us really could live without, if you think, is music, isn't it? And when you look at it, we've often wondered who exactly created the idea of being able to sell music, because up until this particular point on this day in 1877, the only way that you could hear music was at concerts, whether that be outside bandstands or indeed, in the theatre, Royal Opera, concert hall, stuff like that. So we have a lot to thank the phonograph, which was invented by Thomas Alva Edison. Now, basically, it happened, as I say, on this day, but he made his most original discovery, the phonograph, but his early recordings were indentations embossed into a sheet of tin foil by a vibrating stylus. I think I possibly had one of those very early record players, looking at the sound of mine. Also, do you know, by the way, it was Vinyl Record Day, so a double celebration if you love your music and you still buy music in the old traditional way. I love an LP, showing my age, but I like to read all the lyrics and the production stuff and stuff like that and look at the big picture. A fabulous way of selling a product. So let's thank Thomas Edison for inventing what we know as the record player. Finally, on this day in 1966, if you're in Chicago at the amphitheater, then you would have been really witnessing possibly the final time the Beatles would have been, as we know them, the Beatles touring band, because they gave 2 last concerts on this day in 1966 in Chicago. If you remember, it was John Lennon who basically said that he didn't want to tour anymore because he couldn't hear the music. All he could hear was screaming fans. Nobody was listening to the lyrics, and he was becoming disenchanted with it. I think that's what happens to boy bands, isn't it? You know, once they get a bit of money, a bit of success, they don't want you to scream at them anymore. They want to be taken seriously. Of course, the Beatles proved the test of time because they still remain the biggest boy band in the world. And they did really continue to make fabulous music right up until 3 years later in 1969, when they did their very final concert on the top of the Apple building in central London in Savile Row. By the way, I once interviewed the policeman who actually was told to go up to the top of the building to get them to turn the noise down. They had no idea it was the Beatles at the time. Fabulous story. I must try and, as ever, I know I say this, but must try and root that out for you one day. I couldn't believe it. What an interesting sort of job he must have had. And I said, what was it like, you know, when you actually told John Lennon? And he said, oh, he was all right about it, but they just carried on. They didn't really take any notice of me. That's what happened on this day throughout history. Hope you've enjoyed today's selection, and I hope I'll see you again tomorrow. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.